Welcome to the September edition of Patch Tuesday Support Group. It is 1 year, as we were just talking about. So thanks for hanging out with us and spending another hour. As always, our agenda will be Jordan talking about some stats and some beautiful security vulnerabilities that Microsoft has released. I guess they release vulnerabilities, have released patches for.
Sometimes they release
on
fixes.
Tuesday. Then I will bring the news and some things that are exciting. And we're joined today by Alon Leviev. I hope I'm getting that somewhat right on the back end there. I'm sorry if I'm, but we actually talked about some work that he did last month about a Windows upgrade downgrade attack. And so he's going to join us and talk a little bit about that and answer questions. So I'm kind of super excited. Thanks for joining us. As we said before, feel free to come off mute, make fun of us. It's kind of what we're here for. So with that intro over, I'm going to hand it over to Jordan.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you, Brian. I'm going to go ahead and run through a couple of numbers things here, and then I'm going to share a couple of things here on screen. So this month in the wonderful world of patching news, we have a total of 79 new vulnerabilities that were addressed through 262 unique updates. Of those vulnerabilities, we had 7 that were classified as critical. We had 71 were classified as important, 1 as moderate, and none that received a classification of NA. Along the way as well, for some of those, the types and what was actually possible to be done with them. 8 of those were a denial of service. 30 of them were related to elevation of privilege. 11 related to information disclosure. 23 to remote code execution. 4 for security bypass, and 3 for spoofing. With that all being said, let's go ahead and jump into the very first patch that I do want to touch on here, which I don't have too much on this one yet, but I just want to highlight this. I actually saw this in a Reddit post really quickly here, and I'm going to share my screen once I get it pulled up.
This is new ground for you.
I know.
Can you share your screen in Zoom?
I've never tried to do this in Zoom before, so we'll see if I can manage to do it once. You know, I'm usually a Microsoft diehard, so here
luckily
we go.
The button's not next to the leave button, so you're good.
Thankfully, the button is not next to the leave button. However, I could just leave the meeting anyways. You know, just really ratchet up there. So the one I wanted to bring up here was this one right here. I just happened to kind of see this while I was scrolling down through here. It seems like for Windows 22 domain controllers, I haven't been able to find any like major Microsoft commentary on this yet from digging around for it, that it looks like there's an issue with one of the patches from this previous month that they kind of fixed this month, but they fixed it, but didn't turn the fix on, apparently. So not only do you have to apply the patch, but then you have to apply a cur, which is a known issue rollback on top of it, and replace some like specific files. I have no idea how this person figured it out. I have yet to find an actual guide from Microsoft on this. But if you happen to have some Windows Server 2022 servers that are out there where you're running patches between July to the August and September and on for it, there's some interesting bits and pieces that are going on here with this that might be worth looking at in terms of the different event logs to go and dig through here. That all being said, let's jump into a couple of interesting patches along the way. The very first one that I want to take a look at here is CVE 2024-43491. Again, that's CVE 2024-43491, released September 10th, 2024. Little bit of interesting stuff that's going on with this one. The attack complexity was marked as low, and there's also some commentary about the fact that you don't need anything, and it received a 9.1. However, and this is why it's super important to read the rest of the patch notes for this. If you scroll on down here towards the bottom, you will notice this very fancy little thing right here that calls out this fact that, hey, this is only applicable in versions of Windows 10 1507, released in July of 2015, and that it impacts the, let's see here, what can I see it? The LTSB, the Windows 10 Enterprise 2015 LTSB component of it, as well as the IoT version of it. So if you happen to still have, you know, Windows 10 version 1507 or the LTSB versions of it, in that particular case, you might really care about it along the way in that case. We'll see if I can figure out how to stop annotating now that I've, you know, drawn on there. Is there a way to, like,
you don't goof so
afterwards, you know, like you can just hit clear, I guess, clear all drawings. There we go. Fantastic. All right. And then it wants you to just keep going. All right. So, but one other thing to note here, in the event that you are curious, you should consider getting away from 2015 LTSB if you do still happen to have it out there in your environment. The mainstream end of support was in 2020, and yes, there is a patch for this vulnerability still, but just keep in mind extended support does end in 2025. So it's always
a whole year. It's a whole year.
It's a whole year. You got a year to fix this problem. It's fine. It's fine. So this is one of those things. There is functional exploit code maturity for this. There is an actual official fix for it as well. Yes, it is a 9.8, 9.1, you know, out here in terms of scoring, but make sure you read the fine print on what it actually applies to. If you're running up-to-date versions of Windows out there in your environment, this patch becomes a little bit of a nothing burger. So just be cautious as you're kind of evaluating your patch cadence in terms of what you actually want to push and rush on.
Side note, Jordan, the chat is helping out with a keyboard shortcut for the annotations. It's just Alt F4, and it'll go.
Oh, great. I appreciate that. I will absolutely go ahead and make sure I do that on my Mac. That'll work, right? Anyways, we'll go ahead and jump on here into the next one.
Command Q, chat says.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I appreciate
Yeah.
that update. I'll make sure to do that right at the end here so I can clear all of the drawings. Our next vulnerability here is CVE 2024-38014. Again, September 10th, 2024. And if we scroll on down here, again, this is another case of, hey, this is a, you know, reasonable thing to care about from a 7.8, 7.2. Basically, there's a methodology through some of the privilege of the Windows installer binary that you can actually end up getting the system access. There is exploit code that's out there and is in the wild for it. However, again, if we scroll on down here, we can once again read this delicious, you know, factoid that, hey, the thing that it impacts is Windows 11 24H2, which is only available in the preview iteration path for it, which ships natively only on new Copilot Plus devices. So really, you extra care about this if anybody out there is running new Copilot Plus devices, or you happen to be running on your preview builds for it. Those are the only machines that you really absolutely need to go and panic and start worrying about. Again, it's one of the very few high vulnerabilities that got a high ranking for it this year. Along the way,
As I recall too, you can actually, if you don't have policy push to block the enrollment of signing up for preview builds, anyone can just go sign up for them. So be careful.
Something you may want to consider configuring, perchance, as a result of this. Is maybe don't let people arbitrarily sign up for preview builds so that you can keep track of what vulnerabilities you may actually need to care about in your environment on the day-to-day. That is kind of the major patches from the Microsoft side of things that I did want to cover. I did want to add in, we're going to start trying to do this, and we'll start trying to do it a little bit better than me last minute going to Corey and being like, hey, Corey, can you create some cool graphics of this stuff? But we thought that, hey, with it having been a year, we said, what if we go back, you know, a couple of months here, and we go back and we start grabbing and putting together some bar charts for it. And so I just wanted to put this up here on the screen, just to kind of let people see along the way in terms of the total types of patches that we've seen over this past year along the way. And so far, year to date, it would appear that August is the winner in terms of how many bad things happened. It was in August. And so we're going to try putting together kind of a sliding scale. And I think that as we get ready to release this out on YouTube, as well as we release this kind of on the website, we'll work on putting this a little more detailed and maybe get a full year-in review look of all of the vulnerabilities that we've covered along the way for everything across the time slice here. And one other thing that we did have down here, we had one other one here, was just kind of another visibility here, just going across of the different criticals and how many criticals were released across the different months in slightly different view. So anyways, feedback on that or anything like that, you know, let us know. If you want to see more things like this in the future, we're going to try and get some more graphical representations. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing real quick here. And I'm going to just cover a few more things. In third-party updates coming at you from Patch My PC, we had 2,888 total updates released this month. That is more than a few. Over that time period along the way, there were 91 that were classified as critical, 416 classified as important, 2,320 as moderate, 9 as low, and 52 as not applicable. In the world of browser wars, we once again have Google Chrome with 15 patches that came out, Firefox with 180, but if you divide by language packs, it's really only 10. And Edge with 18 and Opera with 12. The one major patch that I had kind of a note about here, there was way more interesting things in the world of data disclosure, which I think Brian has coming up next here a little bit later on. But the one thing I did have that was a big item of note in terms of third-party updates that came out last month was CVE 2024-7965. That's CVE 2024-7965, which was something that when Google Chrome released the fix, that's a fix that applies to Chromium specifically. Basically, it allowed HTML crafted pages that if people could get convinced to go to, that they got to basically completely own the access tokens that were attached to it when you would go there. So if you're behind, this came out late August, early September. If you are behind on patching for Chrome or anything like that, I highly encourage you to start patching all of your Chrome stuff. And with that, I'm going to hand it on over to you, Mr. Brian.
Okay, so there's been a long-running, super fun. I think this is the Black Lotus boot, secure boot, super fun things going on. Microsoft last month released, in August, they released a cumulative update that kind of broke some things. And so they've actually, I think in September, they've actually rolled that fix back. And so they're basically saying we are making this vulnerable again because it broke some stuff. And here's the MSRC article if you want to dig into that. Here is again, here's the larger issue that they've been trying to solve for the better part of a year. This whole you really should, if you haven't, we've talked about this a couple of times in our webinars here, but if you haven't gone and read this KB, you absolutely want to go read this KB. We've been slowly moving this deployment through these different phases of enforcement. People keep saying October for this, enforcement phase, but I'm not 100% sure that is going to remain, as in like next month, is what people have hinted at. But that's apocryphal, I guess, or that's not actual. I haven't seen Microsoft actually state that for sure. But the reason to go through this, their suggested how you fix this is truly awful. I mean, it is 6 reboots over a period of time. I mean, it just is. It's not good. So again, might want to pay attention to that. So September's patches, in theory, fix 3, maybe 4 issues, although somebody just called into question one of them. So here is August patches. There was 3 known issues. First one was the remote desktop connectivity across the gateway seems to be failing. Supposedly they fixed that in September's update, but I see 3 or 4 different people saying nope, it's still crashing. So if you were hoping for a fix there, trust but verify. I wouldn't be shocked if this is still a problem. Also on server OSs, specifically server 2019, after last month's patches, a bunch of them were just consuming all the CPU, trying to scan something in cat root 2. That is supposedly fixed, and I haven't seen anybody suggest that it's not fixed. So that seems good. That was a problem for you, and you went through and you probably, if you had that problem, you probably went through and deleted that folder to solve that problem. But that shouldn't be a problem. That should be fixed as well. If anyone's out there is dual booting Windows, Linux on the same device, there was a update last month that kind of broke that in certain scenarios. There wasn't really a firm list of which Linux distros were or were not impacted, but if you were, that too, in theory, is fixed. Another one that's not listed here is the item level targeting for group policy. That UI was broken, I think, last month or the month before. Supposedly, I saw some people saying that was fixed, but then somebody in the QA said maybe not. So again, trust but verify. Go ahead and let us know if it is or is not. This is the one that Jordan covered, so I'm going to skip it. Again, if you're running LTSB, this is a real problem. You want to go patch right now. Also, just a little PSA, Windows 11 is hitting its second end of life. So for home and pro users, if you are running 22H2 next month, those will no longer get patches. They are dead or should be dead to you. If you're enterprise, though, this is the first one. The first version of Windows 11 is going to go out of support next month. So go ahead and make sure you don't have any Windows 11 21H2. That's for education and enterprise. So that should be all of us. Next, I was going to show you this thing, but Jordan hasn't given me access to the admin portal yet. So there is. Oh yeah, that was going to be the.
Man, I take away my own access. You think I'm going to give you access?
Right. Apparently not. Just a note that there's no there's no .NET patches this month. So if you were like, oh, why are there no .NET patches? Like, well, because there are not, and that does happen sometimes. Believe it or not, they can go 30-ish days without having a vulnerability in .NET, and good for them.
But also, Brian, you're telling me you don't have a separate tenant with admin access?
I totally have my own tenant,
So you could have totally pulled that up.
Yeah, but like, do you see how many tabs I have open? Like, I figured that out after the fact, and then I was just way too lazy and figured I'd throw Jordan under the bus.
I'm always here for throwing Jordan under the bus. So
yeah,
by all means.
I mean, when the choice is do actual work or throw Jordan under the bus, it's not like that's an actual decision.
There's only one choice. I mean,
yeah.
Where's the disable Brian's account button again?
Oh, that was what I was trying to show, which is and I think I actually have this link board here, so I will do that. Just a PSA that next month Microsoft is going to demand that you have MFA turned on for Intune. So and Intune should be prompting you for this and yelling at you about it. You should get emails about it. At least I have been. But if somehow
it's just tenant wide, as I recall, or is it specifically for Intune here?
I don't know. I mean, the ones that this is the Intune support. You might be right. It might be a whole Azure tenant thing. And if I had that message, if I could pull that up, I could confirm or deny. But at least you are going to need to enable multi-factor auth for your tenant.
I've got a link for you, Brian. I'll throw it in the chat. It's tenant wide.
Beautiful. Okay, that doesn't surprise me. So there's some real fun things that happened last month. So nationalpublicdata.com. You may not know who they are, but they are a company that does, I think, security checks or background checks, something like that. And apparently they are, have some real terrible security practices. And so they got, in theory, Hexord. And there was some FUD on this reporting, right? Like somebody's like 2.9 billion people have their social security numbers leaked. And it's not really quite that. A lot of the average age is 70. There's some people that if they're alive, they're 120. So there's a lot of kind of dead people in that list. So, it's not quite 2.9 billion. A lot of the data apparently is kind of also cross-referenced to just really, really bad. So it's not good. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, hey, you should be concerned about this. But when they say like 2.9 billion, it's like, that's, I don't know, how many people do we have in the US? That's
Did you remember to put in a pull request, Brian, on that GitHub
I know.
with all the social security numbers to get yours removed?
My goodness. You want to talk about the joys of social engineering?
Yeah, that was
spectacular.
For those that
I have the link
that aren't getting that
I
joke.
will find it too if you don't have it.
Again, the news reporting came out. It's like 2.9 billion. Like every American has their social security. So like somebody went and did a GitHub repo where they just literally put a text file with every social security number, which is very easy because you just iterate every single number. What is it? 6, 7, 8 digit number, and then people started doing pull requests, which I presume were in joke, or like, please remove this number.
Well, we hope it was a joke.
Hopefully.
Yeah, we hope. I'm just going to presume it is. I'd like to think anybody who's smart enough to like get a GitHub account and then make a PR
and make a pull request, yeah,
is intelligent enough to know that's a bad idea. But anyways, the general suggestion here is absolutely you may want to go do a credit freeze, which is free. Great idea. As a general, it was a great idea before this. It's a really great idea after this. So you'd be okay. Well, that's not great. It's not a good look for them. Here's the page from National Public Data on their security incident. Not a lot of information here. They don't really tell you exactly what happened. But then what happened right after that, it's so funny. You hate to see it, Apparently they just had a members.zip file, just publicly accessible that you could download it. And this members.zip file included some old source code for their website, as well as admin credentials to that website. So it's, wow, just kind of truly awful.
Yeah. Oops.
Yeah. It's not a good look. Moving along, last month we talked about there was a story of this org that hired somebody, and they realized very quickly that he was apparently from North Korea, as in like he was remoting into a device somewhere that they had quote unquote sent him. And here's the Justice Department going after basically somebody who took an apartment and set it up as a remote laptop farm. And like you kind of wonder, like, well, how does that work? How did they not figure out that they were sending this laptop to a North Korean? It's like, well, it's because they sent it to some guy in Tennessee, Nashville, and that's a legitimate address, and he just set it up, and there's probably 300 or whatever devices running out of that apartment, and so it's a fun story to read. Sorry, I don't even think I had this on my list. If you were using Windows 11 requirement bypass trick, which is like /server, that may, if you were doing setup.exe product server to get around Windows 11's requirement, it looks like in the Canary builds they've removed that. So I hope nobody was doing that, but if you were, probably not going to work real soon now. Moving along, SolarWinds had two critical bugs in their web help desk. So this is their remote help tool. The first one was kind of funny. They were like, we don't think this is actually vulnerable. We don't actually think an unauth attacker could make use of this. And then they did. And so they had to go back and be like, oops. Oh, well, I guess, yeah, right. Like, well, okay, I guess they can. And then, to add insult to injury, they also apparently hard-coded some credentials in the code. So people were literally looking, security researchers were looking through this code and being like, okay, well, I guess we could just use these credentials you shoved in there. So not a good look for SolarWinds, but there you have it. Also talking about the U.S. Department of Justice, this is kind of a real interesting one. They sued Georgia Tech. Really actually what happened, this looks like, the Department of Justice got off their butts and did a thing. But actually this was started with a whistleblower case. So some internal and former cybersecurity department at Georgia Tech said, hey, there's some not good things going on. And Georgia Tech does things for the Department of Defense. And when you do those kinds of things, you make certain promises about the security posture of your organization. But they had a professor who apparently had enough clout to say, we're just not installing antivirus in my lab. No AVs on my lab and machines. And so they were basically they're being accused of filing a false report with the DoD. So, just something to think about if you're in an org and you work with some three-letter agencies, you probably don't want to lie on your security questionnaire. Right, Jordan?
No. Don't, just.
Or you're going to have some people like me, not like me, show up at your door.
Well, and even what's even at times is more important than that, right? Like, is not just don't lie, but like don't cause other people to lie on accident.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's the other thing about it. That's kind of is starting to get challenging and interesting, like this started a university degree like as a whistleblower case, but like how do they even know at first right off that? I mean, clearly they figured it out like eventually, right? But like when somebody decides to do that or this, that, or everything, like how do the people who are answering those questions end up learning or knowing about it so they can answer the questions correctly? A lot of times,
right.
Like there's nothing wrong. There's things wrong about not having antivirus on machines. Sure. Let's all agree on that. Right. But like, you can argue like, hey, we have this set of machines that we have in this specific configuration in this specific environment, and we have these compensating controls for it. And as long as you can say that with a straight face, be like, and this is why they exist for this purpose. Right. That's a different conversation than saying like, yeah, no, we have AV on every single device ever and not doing it, right?
Right.
So it matters more about it matters more to be fully honest and transparent about it. And like there were no compensating controls, right? Like, but it matters more to be fully open and honest and transparent about it at times than even then it matters to like trying to hide it. It's not the crime, it's the covering it up, and whether it's intentional or otherwise, right?
Right. All right, moving along. This isn't security, but I found it interesting. So Lidl, which is a German-owned discount grocery store, they're actually kind of doing an Amazon thing. So, and to me, the story here is about GDPR, right? Like GDPR requires a bunch of data sovereignty things, and that's going to make, even here at Patch My PC, we've talked about some of those things, and it's super fun. And so Lidl is like, well, we have a data center. What if we just kind of called that a cloud? So they're actually, we say Lidl is actually their corporate overlords, of course, but they kind of realized, hey, we have a bunch of big data centers. What if we just started selling that to people who needed to keep their data in Germany? And so this is an interesting read just for the future, thinking through the future of technology and what GDPR's continued sort of fallout on what it's going to mean for, hey, how do you make sure that your data only goes, only stays in a particular country? I don't think too many places can offer that, even at the biggest AWS and Amazon level. And so it's like, well, are they going to create data centers in every countries and it's just crazy. So it's just an interesting read on that front of like somebody's clearly seeing, there's money to be made here. Let's go make that money.
It's an interesting challenge too in general, just with like the way that certain components of what things are defined as, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or like the concept of what is PII and things like that. If you think about like how email works, right? And you think about something that could be used to identify somebody. Can email be reasonably used if you know enough about a company and about a person? Can email be reasonably used to identify somebody? Yes. If you email somebody who exists in a different country, where does the copy of that go? Where do the logs for that live? Right? So it makes it very challenging just conceptually, like as a problem, even on simple baseline communication like email, right? For stuff like that. It was very tricky very quickly to actively have a conversation about it.
Yeah. Yep. SonicWall. So if you're using SonicWall's products, their kind of underlying OS had a remotely underlying vulnerability that allowed attackers externally to get admin access on that device. So this is mostly firewalls and those kinds of things. So that's not good. If you got Sonic, hopefully if you're a SonicWall customer, you already knew that and they contacted you. But if not, go ahead and take a look at that. Sort of super fun thing. So SeaTac, which happens to be the airport that my boss flies out of. They had a super fun meltdown, which all feels kind of reminiscent of CrowdStrike. No details. I tried to look this morning to see, because it's been a hot second. I can't find any details of what happened other than a cyber event. But there were some real fun pictures of people just having to resort to pen and paper, like literally baggage handling. It was just like people were just putting, I want to say sticky notes, probably not sticky notes, but like it just boiled down to like people having to do things by hand. There are pictures of the flight boards. They pulled airport staff in and just had like a whiteboard, and we're just updating an actual physical whiteboard on where to get where. So it's an interesting story of cyber attack, but also sometimes you can get things done. Speaking of airlines, this is a super fun one. Bypassing airport security via SQL injection. You might think, this may not shock you, but some of our government agencies have really terrible software practices. And this is a real fun read where someone just did the most basic, talking the most basic of SQL injection attacks in order to get admin access to the portals that define who gets past the TSA checkpoint as flight staff. So you could, like literally with the easiest SQL injection, add yourself as a staff of Delta. Let's say I'm not Delta or any other airline. put your picture in there, put a status, update your security status to approved, and then like in theory walk through TSA. It's again super fun read if that's the kind of thing you want to do. If you ever want to do the catch me if you can, you kind of think we were past the catch me if you can thing, but apparently we're not. Apparently, technology has brought that back. Payway gateway provider Slim CD, so they process credit card transactions. They got hacked, so like 1.7 million credit cards are out there just for giggles. You'd like to think this is, unfortunately, it doesn't feel like news anymore. Just this happens all the time, so it happens. Ending here, the news section is AnandTech is done. So I haven't read that. I haven't followed up on AnandTech in a long time, but in my early days of building PCs, I remember reading them fairly religiously. So if you were a fan, moment of silence for the end of AnandTech. Yeah, exactly. I know, right? AnandTech. I see the AnandTech joke, and I'm totally here for it. Moving on to Microsoft news. I don't even really know what this means. I mean, honestly, unified team app for work personal education. It's not a new, is this an actual new news team? Is it an actual new version of Teams? But I don't think so. I think it's just an improvement to the existing one. But, if you ever wanted to not have to go to a different Teams to talk to your grandmother over Teams, because, who doesn't contact their mother or grandmother over Teams? That's what we all do.
I'm going to interject here, Brian, too. This
Yeah.
is totally unrelated, but it's Teams related. I don't know if it's new, but Teams now supports custom emojis, and by default, it's enabled in every tenant.
Wow.
So you can have fun with that.
The future is here. Finally, we're
detect a new work item in your future.
Oh no! When I saw they made the settings available 2 months ago, I made sure that they were enabled. So
somebody mentioned
detect a new work item in your future.
One that will not get completed or forever be in progress.
So we might remember that whole CrowdStrike thing. Apparently, Pepper's Farm also remembers. So Microsoft, this is kind of funny to me. They came out and said, "Hey, we're going to host a Windows Endpoint Security Ecosystem Summit in September." It's like, oh, awesome. Okay, September 10th. So you missed it. Spoiler, you missed it. But also you weren't invited. So you're like, oh, where's the sign up link? How do I get to the results of this? Nope. They're just telling you they were going to do a thing, and completely untransparent. I have heard there are discussions in the whole CrowdStrike debacle. There was a lot of discussion of well, why can't they just wall off the kernel and put it behind APIs and all of those things? And it sounds like that's the kind of thing they're talking about doing. But I don't know. This was just funny to me that they, very, very late in the game, August 23rd, say, hey, in a couple of weeks, we're going to do this thing, but it's not open. So I don't know. This feels like virtue signaling or something, or whatever that term is. Why would you tell us that there's a thing we can't attend? So Windows 11 24H2 is, somewhere upon us. Here's a little article just about some of the features you can explain. It seems to be there's a phone link in start menu. I don't like cell phones, so that kind of falls flat on me. The kind of cool
link has been there for a while. They're just trying to make it better.
Okay, by better you mean just forcing it in the start menu? Okay, got it.
Yeah, basically. And it's also it still the one thing I will say that's interesting, and there hasn't been any commentary on it. What'll be interesting is historically iPhones have been kind of banned from this as a conversation, right? Just because Apple's walled garden. But with the recent changes to now in iOS 18 starting to support RCS, it'll be interesting to see because originally for the longest time it was we can't do this because iMessage is all proprietary and yada yada yada. With the shift now to RCS, it'll be interesting to see, do they open that up? Do they make it possible as such that you can actually use the iPhone link information, or is it still just no, sorry, I'm not going to do any of that?
Yeah, fair enough. The interesting, if there's anything I noticed in here, it's that the native compression handling will do more than just zip files. So supposedly RAR should be supported. So if you're downloading WinZip or WinRAR just for that purpose, it's going to go. Of course, there's going to be, I'm sure, a bunch of crappy AI stuff that you're super excited about, which leads into this. So when Copilot Plus PCs were announced, it was specifically to Snapdragon and ARM chips. But Microsoft's come out and said, yeah, believe it or not, this shouldn't shock anyone, but Intel and AMD are also going to get in that game. I have sort of asked if like we expect there to be feature parity, and I got crickets, like very pointed crickets of like, well, are the Intune and AMD going to have all the same features as the Snapdragon stuff? And they're like, I can neither confirm nor deny, which is an interesting response. Moving along, yes. If you are deploying, for those of you deploying Windows 11, just a note that in theory, all ISOs are the same. And what I mean by that is that every ISO Microsoft release, there's a base version of Windows, and features get lit up or not lit up based on what SKU you have. And if you are using Home, Defender does not get installed by default, which makes sense, but it was in the image, so it would automatically light up for Pro and Enterprise. If you are imaging from Home, that will no longer be the case. So if the scenario here is you might be using the Home ISO and then up versioning or up skewing it to Pro, where you might really be concerned is this might be something that your vendor is doing, right? So your OEMs might be shipping you devices that were updated from Home, and you want to specifically here, right? You may want to make sure that Defender is installed, because Autopilot and Intune are not going to automatically install it for you. So just a heads up there. Autopatch, really two things here. Autopatch has come out. They've talked about they're going to have some health. They're trying to do some health check stuff. So they're looking for conflicts and going to give you some reporting on conflicting configuration on your device. So if your device is configured in a way that's not going to work, they'll tell you. They also have released some automation, auto remediation scripts. So this is a script. It's not specific to auto. It's a script you can put in Intune's auto remediation that tries to fix common configuration issues with Autopatch. Trying to move along quickly here. Intune, so there's some kind of good stuff that we've seen in Intune here. Specifically, the Mac. Just be aware that the Mac OS and iOS versions have been minimum bumped. So Mac OS is up to 13, and iOS/iPad OS are bumped up to 16. So that's coming soon. So if you have some older devices, I don't think you're going to be able to enroll them in a hot second. If you're using the Endpoint Privilege Manager that's part of the Intune suite, you can now create elevation rules from some approval requests and reports. So if you are doing an audit and you see, hey, this is being not automatically elevated, you can create those rules right from your auditing reports. We have a new log file. You can finally have an app workload log file specific to app installs, which here at Patch My PC we're very, very excited about. They also added a new ARM CPU architecture filter for property for app and policy assignments. So in the filter, you can create a filter now that says, hey, I only want this to deploy to ARM, or not to ARM, I guess, in theory. We'd still like to see that as a app requirement on the app requirement thing, but okay, so be it. The next big kind of news here is they have come out with, or at least they're teasing, that they're going to soon GA some device hardware inventory. So this has been a long ask. So it's what's included, things like network, battery, BIOS, disk, BitLocker, CPU, your TPM, your video. You can't export the data yet via an API, and you can't use that data in a query yet, but they kind of tease those as coming. Last thing here is in Config Manager land, they did release a hot fix of CVE. Look at the CVE, you will find nothing. There is no, oh, sorry. Yes, Corey, that is the Intune thing is part of the base. So that is not part of a suite or suite 2. That is part of the base. So everybody will get that. Everyone will get the inventory in Intune. Talking about this CVE has almost no information whatsoever. based on the summary of what they're talking about, we kind of assume that this is a SQL vulnerability, the SQL connection between the management point and the SQL database. What I will say is they pulled this back because when they released this, they exasperated an existing issue where they orphaned SQL connections in a way that, well, they orphaned SQL connections, that happens. The fix that they put in made that happen a lot. And so you eventually exhaust the SQL connections that are possible to the server or from the device, and you essentially hose your environment. Yes, as Russell is saying, my SE environment is still broken because of this. So yes, there are some hacks that I have seen people do. They've swapped some DLLs out. You might have some love there, Russell, not supported, but yeah, it's a real thing. They pulled it, so you won't see this. So if you hear people talking about, oh, there's a new hotfix, and then you go and you don't see it, that's the reason they pulled this. Okay, so that's it for my section. And as usual, I've gone over time, but I'm excited to have Alon Leviev join us here. We talked about this last month, and he is a security researcher. I'll let you introduce yourself here in a hot second. But he found something that was really interesting and I think relevant to us, which is basically a security flaw in the Windows update mechanism itself. And I mean, I don't want to steal your thunder, but the long and short of it that we talked last month is you're able to, what's the right word? Semi-transparently, transparently downgrade Windows, and Windows itself seems none the wiser. So why don't you introduce yourself briefly, Alon, and then maybe just explain, just in give an introduction to what you found, and then I'll start asking you questions. And if anybody else wants questions, throw it in the chat, and we'll ask them.
Okay, so thanks for the introduction. My name is Alon, as Brian mentioned. And what I research is downgrade attacks on Windows powered by Windows updates. And just to touch base here, when I'm saying downgrade attacks, I mean software downgrade attacks. So that means taking immune and fully up-to-date software and downgrading it to an old and vulnerable version of it. And this then allows to exploit past vulnerabilities that were fixed in these downgraded versions, in the updated versions. And so typically when downgrading, it will require doing two actions. The first one would be it will require, chaining at least two vulnerabilities together. The first one would be the downgrade vulnerability, which allows you to downgrade the component. And then the second vulnerability would be to exploit the downgraded component. So really just a little bit about my motivation. Black Lotus was mentioned in this webinar, and Black Lotus made a lot of noise in the cybersecurity industry, and the main reason for it was because it was able to bypass secure boot, which is a really important feature on a fully updated Windows 11 machines. But in fact, it wasn't a new zero-day vulnerability that Black Lotus exploited. It exploited an old and fixed vulnerability, and that was of course done by employing a downgrade attack. And this really caught my attention. I found it very interesting that it was able to bypass secure boot on a fully updated machine. And while Microsoft updated and fixed the secure boot downgrade attacks, I wondered if there are other critical components, other than secure boot, that may have been vulnerable to these very similar downgrade attacks. And so my goal was to understand what is the current state of downgrade attacks on Windows and if other components may have been overlooked. And when looking at downgrades, the first thing that I did was to try to check for which component would be suitable to target. And I decided to target the least expected component to perform downgrades, which is Windows updates. And I researched its architecture and the way it works. And I found a flaw that led me to completely take over the update process and basically craft any update that I want. And for anyone that wants to find the details, it is attached in the SafeBridge blog post. So the blog post details more of the technical details. So once I was able to take over the Windows update process, I then looked which components can be vulnerable, and I was able to downgrade the kernel, was able to downgrade drivers, DLLs, and everything that I wanted. And the most interesting thing that I was able to downgrade was components that reside in the virtualization stack. And for those of you who are not familiar with the virtualization stack, this is was introduced in 2015, I think. It's called virtualization-based security, and really it is deeply privileging the kernel to make kernel access less valuable. That's like the whole idea that the kernel is now assumed compromised, and the virtualization is like the new place to implement critical security features and store secret keys, ones that shouldn't be compromised even from the operating system's kernel. And I was able to downgrade the secure kernel, the credential guard as the user mode trustlets, and even the hypervisor itself, which is a component that powers VBS. And as a result, I was able to compromise the entire virtualization stack and bring back to life vulnerabilities sourced in the virtualization stack. And other than that, I also found a way. So VBS, as I said, it should be protected from administrators. It is implemented kind of in a new virtual machine that is on the near the real operating system. And so I wondered, because it protects from administrators, I wondered how they protect disablements. Because if an administrator can turn off VBS instead of dealing with it, that would be enough for an attacker to bypass these protections. And the way that they protect it is by implementing a feature which is called a UEFI lock. It's basically a UEFI boot service variable that once configured, the source of configuration, which usually resides in the Windows registry, is no longer the source of trust. It is the UEFI lock. And so if the UEFI lock is configured and you change your registry, then it will have no effect and VBS will continue to run as usual. And I found that if I just break one of VBS's files, so put there any attacking controlled file, VBS will just not load, abandoning the UEFI lock. And that was one additional attack that I was able to perform to bypass VBS's UEFI locks. So that's pretty much about it. I released a tool called Windows Downdate, which implements all of the attack vectors that I described the last few minutes. And of course, for anyone that is interested in more of the technical details, you can visit SafeBreach's blog post, and all of the technical details are in there. And that's it.
So Alon, can you tell me a little bit about practically speaking? Because I know you released a tool, but like practically speaking, to execute the attack, like what do you have to achieve, right? Like I know you talked about there's a couple of key files, CVS and PS, some exec file, that I think like you have to rewrite those yourselves, or like what do you have to do there?
Yeah, so there are multiple files that the part that you are talking about is making the downgrade. Making the downgrade perfect, so making it irreversible. So if future updates are coming, so the downgrade will not be overridden. And if you check for updates after the downgrade has occurred, we want to make sure that the system appears to be fully up to date. So in order to do that, I patched two files. The first one is sfc.exe, and this file basically checks for corruptions in system files. So it was not digitally signed, and really the key here, I was also able to patch another file which is called poqexec.exe. And really the key here, even if these files were properly signed, the question is whether they are checked before execution. Because even if they are signed and when they're executed, they're not validated. So I could also replace it. So I was able to patch these two files so that if one checks for corruptions in system files, these corruptions will not be detected. And the other executable, the poqexec one, is the executable that parses the Windows Update action list. So this is it's basically a list that says which files to update, which files to change. And I was able to patch it in a way that when a new update is available, it will not be installed. It will actually be falsely installed, as if the action list is empty, will not true in practice. And in terms of the system appearing to be fully up to date, so the way that it is done is because when you check for updates, what the system does is to check if there is any update that is available and is not installed on the system. And when I downgrade the system, I'm not installing or uninstalling any updates technically. And so when I perform the attack and no updates are uninstalled, the system will appear as if it is up to date because there will be no missing updates.
So if you're replacing those two files, like, is that not something? It seems like that's something like you mentioned the signing, right? Like I hear what you're saying, right? If you sign a file but you don't check the signature of the file,
yeah,
it's kind of like if a tree falls in the wood, but nobody's around to hear it. It doesn't make a sound, right? Like, but isn't that like I'm thinking of Microsoft? I'm thinking of Defender. Like, wouldn't Defender pick that up like immediately, or?
So actually, no, it doesn't validate the signature or validity of files.
Okay.
And in terms of the attack itself, since this is a new method, so Defender, at least at the time that I researched, it didn't detect this Windows update takeover.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Fair enough. So it's probably just somebody, ASR rules like it. There's a gap. What you're saying is there's a gap there, right? Like it just seems like we should be treating it. What astounded me about your research, or at least as much as that I could understand it was like there's a couple of really key files and processes in Windows Update. And again, hats off to you when you were like, hey, what I want to go after I want to go after Windows Update. Like I love that was where your heads was like, I want to downgrade up Windows. Where should I hit? Maybe the thing that upgrades it or updates it. So I love where your head was at there. But the astounding part to me was just like there's two key files, and to your point, apparently they're just not validating them. They're not signing them, and they're not validating them that they are signed, and they aren't checking. Like it's just that seems crazy, like to the level of
But
like,
the key thing, So the key here is that that was like post-exploitation action for me to replace these files. But the assumption here is that with the level of access that you get by doing the downgrades, even without patching these files, you could probably avoid anyone from installing updates, detecting corruptions, etc. Because you could get to the kernel, you could get to the secure kernel, the hypervisor.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, once you're in, you could disable everything, right?
It's wild, and it's wild to me, right? Like the SFC, SFC scan now memes. I'm expecting yet even more of them, right? Of like now, not only does it not fix problems, but hey, now it can also be used to make new ones. Like it's wild to me that like a tool is that pervasive, and is that widely out there is open to modification like that.
Yeah.
Like that's crazy.
And in the chat, I posted a link to Microsoft's MSRC article about it. But like, I know part of it, and I think you said that they've put they patched part of, they've released a patch for part of, I think, what you talked about, if I understand correctly.
So there is an online guide about how to mitigate these downgrade attacks on the virtualization stack. So this is there's basically a system policy that you can add, which will prevent downgrading VBS files. So I recommend checking out this online guideline.
Yeah, I posted it. I posted it in the chat. At least I think I got the right thing. Because there's two vulnerabilities here. 2024 38202, I think, and 21302. I think I'm getting the right. And then they actually have another one that talks about both of them. So I think hopefully I'm pointing people in the right direction there on. But in one of them, they seem to suggest like, oh, like I remember last month when I initially looked at it, like, well, this might take us a while because it feels like their plan was to like blacklist, files. And I was just like, I would just I'm kind of flabbergasted why why that was their solution that they were thinking about versus just validating the signature piece of files, right? Like, I still feel like I must be missing something there.
Yeah. So we have to separate these two things. So the SFC and and POQ exec, it was not like part of the. It was just a post-exploitation method for me to make my downgrade undetectable. But then for the secure kernel, the virtualization stack, there are signature checks. But when you downgrade, the file is still validated. It's still signed, but it's just vulnerable. Right. So that was that's like the key element here. Yeah.
And just,
So oh, sorry, go for it, Jordan.
I was going to say, just for clarity, can you talk a little bit more when you talk about like VBS, about what VBS is, just to add some clarity there, just in case we have anybody like, because when I first heard VBS and when I first read VBS, like even in it, my brain went, wait, virtual basic? Like, what are we doing? Still running around with VBS scripts, right? And like, if you're a config manager admin, which I'm betting we got a lot of config manager admins in the room here, they probably still remember a lot about VBS in the world of VBS. And so like, can you kind of like, this might be a new term for some people, and I could totally see some confusion between those two. So can we like walk down the difference of like what that segmentation means between administrator and kernel and what it actually is in this case, the virtualization-based security component?
Yeah, of course. So VBS is basically an isolated virtual environment, which is powered by the Hyper-V hypervisor. And the goal of it is, as I said, to deprivilege the kernel, to make kernel access less valuable. So with VBS, what happens is that it creates, as I said, this new virtual environment that cannot be compromised even from the normal kernel. And then new security features, and for example, credential guard, HVCI, etc., they're all implemented in this secure environment, which cannot be compromised. Its memory cannot be read from the normal kernel. And so, for example, let's take, for example, LSAS, which is the process that's used to hold passwords back then, and hashes and sensitive data. So now, if you have VBS enabled with credential guard, these secrets, this sensitive secrets and data is not actually stored in the original LSAS process, but in the virtual environment. This the one that cannot be accessed from the normal operating system. And so that's kind of what VBS is. The way that it is implemented is by implementing virtual trust levels. That's the virtual environment. And then the old operating system, like the original operating system, is implemented in VTL0, known as normal mode. And then we have VTL1, known as the secure mode. And that's where all of these critical security features are implemented in.
Awesome. Thank you. Sorry for derailing what you probably had, which was a very good question, Brian. But just my brain kept getting stuck in like.
Understood.
And if I'm my brain, I'm a very simple man. I don't know if my brain was getting stuck.
Simple man.
You know, I figured maybe somebody else, everybody else is smarter on that one. But yeah. So thank you.
So there is additional information on VBS and the entire research in the separate blog post. So if anyone wants to dive deeper into how these things work, there's an explanation in the blog post.
Yeah, I posted that in the chat too, Alon, to point them directly to your blog post. Yeah. It really, it wasn't a question, Jordan. It was a clarification. Because I think I was so shocked by that by the CBS and I keep forgetting the other one. But I hear what you're saying now, which is like, well, that's not the attack vector. That's like after an attack, and just think that's how I kind of hide. You know, that's how I hide it. But the real attack, exactly. The real attack vector was the fact that, if I remember right, like you could just tell the reboot part of Windows Update, you could basically just tell it to do almost anything. I know that's oversimplifying the situation, but it was like you could you were able to just tell the Windows Update stack, like, hey, you have these tasks to do upon reboot, and it would just do them.
Yeah. Yes. That's one of the this is my downgrade primitives. That's how I downgraded files. But then there's also the issue of being able to downgrade files that are residing in a more privileged areas than the attacker starting point. Right. That's what I was. That's what I talked about when I mentioned VBS.
Okay. Yeah. Anyone else have any questions for Alon? Whether somebody wants to come up, they can, or Jordan. by all means. But thanks for joining. Like again, I was I usually don't go to Black Hat. Or sorry, I've never been to Black Hat. I like to go sometimes just once. But I saw your session notes and I was like, dang, this is really interesting, and I want to know more. So I just want to thank you for taking the time to come out and explain it to us, slobs who don't really do. I mean, I think of us sometimes as operational security. Our job is to like apply patches. We don't always understand the whys and wherefores about how these attacks work. And so I just want to thank you for finding it in the first place and putting, you know, I happen to know a few people in the Windows Update team, and they're like, yeah, this really sucks. So hats off to you for making their lives terrible. You know, I mean, they did it themselves. You were just you were just pointing it out to them. So, but thanks for coming here and giving us the explanation.
Thank you for hosting me, of course.
Yeah. So with that, we generally are kind of done. As usual, we're slightly over time, but if anybody wants to come off mute and ask any questions about anything, we'll hang around. If you got to head off, Alon, but that's fine, totally get it. But if anybody wants to come off mute or ask questions, I don't think we had much in the Q&A.
There was not much.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, I don't think we really. Okay. Oh yeah. So thanks, Joey Gleason. We were in the Q&A. We were talking about the item level targeting that does actually appear to be fixed in September's updates. The preview, it wasn't fixed in the preview, but they did get that in for the Spark feature, which is nice. The question is, what's the recommended mitigations against this? So I think I can summarize, and then Alon can like tell me I'm wrong, because or just take a pass. I think Microsoft basically said you should really like monitor certain, like you should monitor and audit the modifications of certain files to look for this. I think that's the, again, oversimplification, but I kind of think that was my read of it.
So I'd recommend visiting the online advisory, and then all of the information about it is there.
Yeah. There's some good mitigations there that we posted in the links above. So, but I would say when I went there, like, I mean, they have a patch for part of it, but I think the main attack method is not remediated yet, and you know their advice to you, I would say, is incomplete and concerning. But that's my own personal take.
My guess is like at best point, and I haven't spent terribly a lot of time on like digging into it. My best guess at this point is honestly going to be trying to build out custom IOCs that try to look for specific things like, hey, has SFC skin now been modified away from, you know, what it actually should be, would be like one of those. And like also looking for anomalous changes to registry keys that shouldn't be changing in weird ways. And trying to like look for those different types of behavior patterns. You know, you can build your own custom IOCs for it. And yeah, I mean, the extent of Microsoft's guide here basically is like figure out how to monitor for it. Well, that would be where I would start if I was going to start building out for it. That would be where I would start, is like monitoring some of those particular processes.
I see Mike in the Q&A also said, I have a scan that keeps triggering on the update vulnerability. How can I tell my manager I have no way to resolve this vulnerability?
Oh, really? Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
The Microsoft guide, and then the Microsoft guide.
Yeah. Usually any documentation, things like that. I mean,
I mean, I don't think we said this, but Alon, like to do the attack, like you need local admin on the box, right?
Well, I don't know if his question is pertaining specifically to this update or just in general. Like there is a vulnerability that keeps triggering. I think it's more of a question on like, how do you have that conversation with the manager? And I don't know if you probably don't want my advice given all this, but.
Well, let's answer that right on. I do think, and I think you called it out, like when I was reading your stuff, like you were going to need admin, but tell me if I'm there.
Yeah, so there are two attack methods. The one of them requires admin, and then from admin you can attack the kernel, you can attack VBS, and then the other is a standard user, which can also downgrade the files, but that requires user interaction.
Got it.
So there are two methods, and
So with a little bit of social engineering, you can get a
Yeah.
you can get a low rights user to do this
Yeah,
shit.
yeah, but still VBS is usually, and also secure boot, by the way, usually attacked from administrators. So this is a boundary that it is a security boundary, even from administrator to hypervisor to secure kernel, credential guard, etc.
Yeah. Now you're more basic. You're more higher level question there, Jake. Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know.
I think
Like-
it totally depends on the
like-
company, the dynamic that you have with your with your manager. Like, I think the easiest one is like find links or articles that like stipulate like they only really affect this, or like there isn't a remediation available for it yet. But beyond that,
Like-
I'm not 100%.
Like, I want to be clear, right? Like because I'm still not even sure that I understand the 10,000 foot level question, which is like, okay, what if you have a vulnerability that isn't patched yet? What do you do? Right? Is that what you're saying? Yeah, I mean,
I think so. Yeah. Like,
yeah.
how do you communicate that?
Yeah.
You know?
I think it's what George said, right? Like, you have to go to the MSRC. Hopefully, there's an article that Microsoft says like, hey, this isn't fully patched yet.
Yeah. There's a degree of like tongue in cheek that I say that, but also like you need like one, you need to get documentation for it because you need to protect yourself, one, right, as well. Like, not just, and your organization also needs to protect itself, right? So it's, hey, there's no fix for it yet, and then here's the things we're gonna do in order to try to monitor or adjust or make sure that even though it's not, that we can take some type of actions against it. And be very, very careful, because everybody here remembers WannaCry, hopefully, probably, right?
Yeah.
And like some of the early on things of like, well, how can we protect ourselves against WannaCry? We're like, well, we'll just turn off port 445. That won't cause anything to possibly go wrong, right? And like, that did cause things to go wrong. So it's not just, you can't just, unfortunately, for a lot of the times, so like, what are you going to do? Well, we'll just turn off the Windows Update service. That will solve the problem, right? No Windows Update service, no problem. And even that probably won't solve the problem. So it's a lot of like, there's this concept of like, do you mitigate it? Can you transfer the risk, or can you accept the risk? Basically, those are kind of your three different stances inside of security, right? Well, there's no mitigation really yet at this point, right? So, or the degree of mitigation you can do is you can monitor it, right? You can't really transfer the risk, make it somebody else's problem, be like, it's Microsoft's fault. Well, there's no real transfer there, right? For it either. And then the last one is you just have to accept the risk to a degree, right? You have to accept that this is a problem that we are going to deal with, and that we are going to have to maintain this particular stance until such a time as a patch comes out or a more active way of monitoring it comes out. There's nothing our organization can do until then. I do want to say, I just realized the irony of the fact that,
there you go.
Jake, that I have red and blue lights and you have all your comments about not being a cop.
Yeah, there you go.
Just now realized this.
You got to have them flashing.
I'll work on it for next time.
Dude, for reals.
5 minutes goes a long way, Jordan.
Yeah. Okay, I don't see anyone with their hands raised. Beth asks, when's the next meetup? It's we are shooting for the Thursday after Patch Tuesday. So Patch Tuesday +2. Second Tuesday of the month +2. That's set that up, and that's when we hope to do these things. Same place, same bat channel. As always, like I said earlier, this will be posted to YouTube either maybe tomorrow, if not Monday, one of those two. Depends how fast the internet tubes go. Again, Alon, thanks for joining us. Really,
Thank you.
You nailed it. Thanks for bringing it. And with that, everyone, have a great month. We'll see you next month.
Adios. Well, I don't think ignorance is an excuse either, right? Like,
yeah,
it's all I got, Jacob.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I got. If I can't claim ignorance, what am I doing here?